My son's wife smiled at me. The way people smile at someone they've already decided doesn't matter anymore. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late April. She'd driven up from Charlotte without calling first, which should have been my first signal. She pulled into the driveway in that white Escalade they couldn't really afford, stepped out straightening her blazer like she was heading into a board meeting, and walked through my front door, carrying a manila envelope tucked under her arm. I was sitting at my kitchen table finishing a bowl of chili. The TV in the den was on low. Some weather report about storms coming up from the coast. She set the envelope on the table beside my bowl without being asked. "We thought it might be a good time to talk about some things," she said. I looked at the envelope. Then I looked at her. Then I looked past her toward the front door, where my son was still standing on the porch, hands in his pockets, not quite meeting my eyes. Neither of them had noticed the man sitting in my living room. His name is Philip Garrett. He's been my attorney for 22 years. When my daughter-in-law finally turned and saw him, the smile disappeared so fast it was like someone had cut the power. She didn't say anything for a moment, just stared. Then she looked back at me. "Dad," my son said carefully from the doorway. "Who is that?" I picked up my spoon. "Why don't you both come inside and we'll talk?" "My name is Walter Crane. I'm 68 years old. I live in Mooresville, North Carolina, about 30 minutes north of Charlotte, in the same house I bought with my wife Joanne in 1991. 3 bedrooms, brick exterior, a back porch that faces a pond. There are Canada geese out there most mornings, and I have a standing argument with them about the lawn that I have been losing for 12 years. I spent 35 years in industrial insurance. Not the exciting kind. Not the kind you see in commercials with friendly dogs and warm music. The kind where you spend long days reviewing coverage limits for manufacturing plants, chemical facilities, processing warehouses, complicated work, important work, the kind of work that teaches you to read every word on every page before you sign anything. When I retired 3 years ago, I didn't make a big fuss about it. A few people from the office brought a sheet cake to the conference room. My supervisor said some nice things. I drove home, changed into jeans, and went fishing at the pond out back. That was retirement enough for me. Joanne passed away 5 years before I retired. Pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. She was 61 years old. She had planned to retire the same year I did and spend 3 months driving the Pacific Coast Highway. She had a whole folder on her laptop, hotels bookmarked, restaurants circled, a playlist she'd been building for 2 years. I still have that laptop in the closet. I haven't been able to open it. After she died, I kept working because stopping felt like another kind of loss. And when I finally did retire, I found a rhythm. Coffee at 6, a walk around the neighborhood, 3 mornings a week at the Lake Norman YMCA. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'd drive down to a place called Anchor Hardware, not to buy anything particularly, just to walk the aisles and talk to the owner, a man named George, who had opinions about everything and was wrong about half of it. That's a good enough average for a friend. I didn't live extravagantly. My truck was a 2017 Silverado with a dent above the rear wheel, that I kept meaning to fix and never did. I wore the same brand of boots I'd worn since the early 90s. I didn't belong to a country club. I did not own a boat, which was a decision Joanne and I made jointly after watching our neighbors spend an entire summer repairing one instead of using it. The point is, I didn't look like a man with money. My son knew better. Or at least he should have. His name is Connor. He's 42. He lives in Charlotte with his wife, Amber. They have 2 kids, both in elementary school. Connor works in commercial real estate development, a field that treated him well for about a decade, and then began treating him the way it eventually treats most people who confuse a bull market for personal genius. Amber manages a boutique she co-owns with a friend. Whether that business turns a profit is something I've never been entirely clear on, though I've noticed the boutique has moved locations twice in 4 years, which is usually not a sign of thriving. When Connor was young, we were close. He was the kind of kid who wanted to know how things worked. He'd follow me around when I worked on the car, handing me tools and asking questions faster than I could answer them. We went to Panthers games together, when he was in high school. We drove to Asheville one summer and hiked the Black Balsam Knob Trail, just the two of us, and ate sandwiches at the top looking out over the Blue Ridge. After he married Amber, things didn't fall apart. They just shifted. Amber wasn't unfriendly exactly. She was careful, measured, the kind of person who is always aware of what she doesn't yet have. Visits became occasional. Phone calls became brief. I understood some of it. Life with two young kids is genuinely busy. I didn't take it personally for a long time. Then I started noticing the questions. Dad, have you thought about downsizing? That house is a lot to maintain for one person. Dad, are you still using the same financial advisor? Because there are some really good wealth management options now. Dad, I was reading that a lot of people your age find it simpler to consolidate accounts. Have you looked into anything like that? Each question on its own seemed reasonable, but the way each piece of a mosaic seems unremarkable until you step back far enough to see the image. I started stepping back. The call that changed everything came from a man named Gordon Price. He and I had worked together for almost 15 years before he retired. Sharp, meticulous, the kind of man who double-checks his own double-checks. We'd stayed in touch the way men of a certain generation do, mostly through intermittent fishing trips and the occasional email forward. He called on a Thursday morning in February. I was on the back porch with coffee, watching the geese do their thing. Walter, he said, and then paused in a way that told me this wasn't a social call. Gordon, I ran into Connor at a networking event down in Charlotte last week. Oh yeah, I said. How'd he look? Another pause. He looked fine, but he said something I've been thinking about since. I waited. He mentioned that you'd been having some trouble managing things on your own. Said he and Amber were worried about you. Getting a little forgetful. Having trouble keeping up with bills and paperwork. I set down my coffee cup. The geese kept walking across the lawn. He said that, I said finally. I didn't think much of it at first, Gordon said. Then I thought about it more, and I thought you should know. I thanked him. We hung up. I sat on that porch for a long time. I was not forgetful. I managed my bills the same way I always had, a spreadsheet I updated every month, the same system I'd used since 1987. 3 days earlier, I had renewed my car insurance, caught an incorrect rate adjustment, called the company, and had it corrected inside of 20 minutes. I was not struggling, but apparently, someone needed people to believe otherwise. I didn't call Connor that night. I wanted to think first. That had always been my way. Joanne used to say I processed everything at the speed of a glacier, but I was usually right by the time I got there. I spent a week paying attention in ways I hadn't before. I thought back over the previous year. The questions about downsizing, the comments about my financial advisor, the time Amber mentioned almost as an aside that she'd heard good things about a local elder law attorney. The time Connor asked if I still had Philip's number, meaning my attorney, and whether I'd considered getting someone more current. Philip Garrett. 22 years. He'd handled Joanne's estate. He'd reviewed my retirement accounts. He knew every financial document I owned. The idea of replacing Philip had never once crossed my mind. I called him on a Sunday afternoon. We talked for 2 hours. By the end, Philip had agreed to help me look at everything with fresh eyes. Not because we thought we'd find something criminal, because we thought I deserved to know what the picture actually looked like. Philip came over the following Wednesday with a yellow notepad and a thermos of his own coffee, which told me he expected to be there a while. We started with the simple things: my accounts, my property, my insurance policies, my will, which I hadn't updated since Joanne died. Then Philip started asking questions. Connor knows the will hasn't been updated? I mentioned it once. Does he know what's in it? The broad strokes. Philip wrote something down. Does he know what the house is worth? I hadn't told him directly, but the Zillow estimate wasn't hard to find, and Connor worked in real estate. He would know. Probably, I said. Philip nodded slowly. Has he mentioned anything about power of attorney? I looked up. Amber did, once. Said it was something I should think about getting in place. In whose favor? She didn't specify. Philip set his pen down and looked at me the way he looked at coverage documents when he spotted language worth examining. Walter, let me ask you something. In the last 12 months, has Connor seemed interested in your finances in a way that felt different than before? I thought about the questions, the comments, the suggestions about new advisors, the remark about consolidating accounts. Yes, I said. Has there been any financial pressure on his end that you're aware of? I hesitated. I know the market's been rough for developers. Do you know specifics? I didn't. But Philip did some quiet checking over the following days. Not anything invasive. Public records. A few professional contacts in Charlotte. The kind of inquiry that takes a few phone calls when you know the right people. What came back wasn't a crime. It was a pattern. A development project Connor had been a lead investor and had stalled badly 18 months ago. 2 other projects had lost anchor tenants. He'd taken out a second line of credit against their house. Amber's boutique had received what appeared to be an informal personal loan. Amount unclear, source unclear. None of it was illegal. All of it was serious. And all of it would look very different if Connor had access to a parent's assets. The week after Philip finished his review, something else surfaced. A former colleague of mine, a woman named Sandra Oakes, who still worked in insurance, sent me a message. She'd been contacted, she said, by a financial planning firm asking questions about transitioning asset management for an aging relative. No name mentioned, but the firm's name she gave me was one Connor had referenced 6 months earlier in a conversation about wealth management. I sat with that for a long time. I kept looking for the innocent explanation. The one where Connor was genuinely worried about me and had just gone about expressing it the wrong way. The one where Amber was clumsy but not calculating. The one where a father's instinct to protect his child from blame was actually correct. I looked for it. I couldn't find it. One night I drove past the house where Connor grew up. I wasn't being sentimental. I was just out driving the way you do sometimes when you can't sleep. But I slowed down anyway. The new owners had painted the shutters. The oak tree in the front yard was bigger than I remembered. In that house, Connor had learned to ride a bike in the driveway. He'd done a science fair project on electrical circuits that actually worked. He'd sat at the kitchen table, struggling through geometry, while I tried to remember enough to help him, and mostly failed. I wondered when he'd stop being that kid. I wondered whether it had happened all at once or so gradually that no one could name the moment. I didn't sign anything. I didn't call Connor. I made some decisions first. Philip had a recommendation. Not dramatic, not aggressive, just thorough. I updated my will. I met with a certified elder law attorney named Patricia Stokes, who Philip had worked with for years. Together, the 3 of us spent several weeks restructuring things. I moved the majority of my assets into an irrevocable trust. The house I placed under a separate legal arrangement that made any transfer considerably more complicated than a simple signature. I also got a complete cognitive evaluation through my doctor. Not because I doubted myself, because I wanted documentation, a professional record stating clearly that I was of sound mind and functioning at full capacity, in case anyone ever wanted to claim otherwise. My doctor, who has known me for 16 years, looked at me over his glasses when I explained what I wanted and why. Walter, he said, you just described the most organized financial self-protection plan I've heard from a patient. Thank you, I said. Please write that down. I told no one what I'd done. Not a friend, not a neighbor, not Connor. Then Connor called on a Friday evening and said he and Amber wanted to stop by. Said they had some paperwork they thought would be useful to get organized together. Family stuff. Practical. Nothing to worry about. I told him Tuesday afternoon would work fine. I called Philip that same night. He already knew what I was going to ask. Tuesday came bright and cool. I made a pot of coffee, set out 2 cups, and put Philip's cup on the side table, next to the armchair in the living room. He arrived at noon. We talked for a while. Then I heard the Escalade in the driveway. When Amber walked through the door carrying that manila envelope, she was already talking, saying something about how they wanted to make things easier for me, how they'd found a really qualified firm, how this was all just being smart and proactive. Then she turned and saw Philip. She stopped mid-sentence. Connor appeared in the doorway behind her, looked at Philip, and something moved across his face that I hadn't seen there before. Not anger. Not surprise exactly. More like the particular expression of a man who has just realized the hand he's playing isn't the hand he thought he had. "Dad," Connor said carefully, "this is Philip Garrett." "I know who he is," I said. "He's been my attorney for 22 years. Amber recovered faster than Connor. She smiled, introduced herself to Philip as though they were meeting at a dinner party, and set the manila envelope on the coffee table. "We just thought it might be helpful to have some documents to look over," she said. Philip picked up the envelope before I did. "Do you mind?" he said pleasantly. Amber minded. She was too careful to say so. We all sat down. Philip took 15 minutes with the documents. I watched Connor watch Philip. Amber looked at her phone once and then seemed to decide that was the wrong move and put it away. Finally, Philip set the papers on the table. "These are broad," he said simply, "particularly this section." He touched a page without pointing to a specific line. "This language around health-related decision-making could extend to financial management under a fairly wide interpretation." Connor shifted in his seat. "That's standard language in planning documents." "For some documents," Philip said, "depending on the intent." The room got quiet in that particular way that happens when everyone in it knows exactly what's being said and no one wants to be the one who says it first. I let the quiet go on for a moment. Then I spoke. "I'm not signing anything today." Amber smiled again, the same careful smile she'd walked in with. "Of course, there's no rush. We just wanted to." "I'm not signing this version at all," I said. "Philip and Patricia Stokes have already drafted the documents I need. That process is complete." Connor looked up sharply. "Who's Patricia Stokes?" "A certified elder law attorney. I've been working with her and Philip for the past 2 months." Another silence. Then Amber said quietly, "So you already have everything in place?" "I do." Connor looked at the coffee table, at the manila envelope, at his own hands. "Did you know we were coming?" he asked. "You told me Tuesday afternoon," I said. "I took you at your word," which was true in the narrowest sense. I had taken his word for the visit. I had simply spent the previous 2 months making sure I didn't need to take his word for anything else. Amber stood up first. She smoothed her blazer. Said something about the kids having an activity that afternoon. Connor followed her, and at the door he stopped and turned back. He looked older than 42 right then. He looked like a man carrying something heavy he hadn't figured out how to put down yet. "Dad," he started. "Drive safe," I said. He left. Philip waited until the Escalade backed out of the driveway. Then he looked at me with the expression of a man who has seen most things and has stopped being surprised by them. "You handled that well," he said. "I've been reading documents for 35 years, I said. "I know what standard language looks like." The weeks after were quieter than I expected. I had braced for a confrontation, a phone call, an accusation. Something. Instead, Connor didn't call, Amber didn't reach out, no emails, no texts. The silence hurt more than an argument would have. An argument at least is engagement. Silence is just absence. I kept my routines, coffee at 6, walks, the YMCA. George at the hardware store had a new theory about the county's road repaving schedule, and I let him explain it to me twice. I drove to explain it to me twice. I drove to Statesville one Saturday and walked through a farm equipment auction. I had no business attending. I bought a pair of work gloves I didn't need. I ate lunch at a diner that had been there since 1962 and had a chicken salad sandwich that was better than anything deserved to be. I also thought about Connor more than I wanted to admit. People talk about situations like this the way they talk about heist movies, like there's a villain and a hero and a plan and justice served. Real life doesn't run on that track. Connor wasn't a stranger who had come after my money. He was my son. He'd been there when Joanne died, and whatever his failings were now, he had been genuinely present in those weeks. Sleeping on the couch, handling things I couldn't, making phone calls I didn't have the energy to make. I hadn't forgotten that. I wondered how much of what happened was Connor's own thinking and how much was Amber. I wondered how long the money pressure had been building before it pointed itself in my direction. I wondered whether, in some other version of events, He'd thought about calling me himself and asking for help directly, man to man, father and son, and whether something had stopped him, pride or Amber or fear. I didn't have answers. I had a son who wasn't calling. One morning I drove to Charlotte. I didn't tell Connor I was coming. I parked down the street from his office building and sat in the truck for about 20 minutes. I wasn't sure why I'd driven down. Some impulse I hadn't finished processing. After a while, I turned around and drove home. Some conversations have to happen when they're ready. Showing up unannounced with unfinished thoughts isn't a conversation. It's a collision. I waited. 2 months after the Tuesday visit, on a Wednesday evening in late June, my phone rang. I was on the back porch again. The geese were out. The pond was still. Connor. I let it ring once more than I needed to. Then I answered, "Hey, Dad, hey." A long pause. The kind that contains more than pauses usually do. "I've been thinking," he said. "Okay, about what we did with the paperwork." Another pause. About everything. I didn't help him along. He needed to get there himself, and filling the space for him would only let him off part of the way. "I think I told myself it was about helping you," he said finally. But that wasn't honest. I waited. "We're in a bad spot financially." His voice was flat. Not dramatic. Just tired. "I've been in a bad spot for about 2 years and I kept thinking it would turn around. And then it didn't. And somewhere along the way I started." He stopped. "I started thinking about things I shouldn't have been thinking about." "Your mother's estate," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah." I closed my eyes. Joanne would have had something measured and right to say here. "I was working with less. You could have called me," I said. "I know." "You could have said, 'Dad, I'm in trouble. I need to talk.' That's all you had to say." "I know that." He sounded like he was 30 years younger and had just broken something valuable. "I think I was ashamed. And when you're ashamed enough, you start making it someone else's problem instead of your own. That was honest enough that I had to sit with it. Are you and Amber in the same place on all this?" I asked. A pause that was slightly too long. "She doesn't know I'm calling you." That told me some things. "Okay," I said. "I'm not asking you for anything," he said quickly. "I'm not calling to ask for money or to make a case for anything. I needed to say that I was wrong and that I knew it." 3 words offered without a condition attached. That matters more than people think. I looked out at the pond. A single goose was standing at the water's edge, perfectly still, looking at something I couldn't see. "I hear you," I said. "That's it?" "What did you want me to say, Connor?" "I don't know. I thought you'd be angrier." "I was angry," I said. "I'm not anymore. Anger is expensive and I'm retired." He laughed. It was small and a little broken, but it was real. We talked for about 40 minutes. Not about money. Not about the documents or Philip or any of it. We talked about the development project that had failed. We talked about the stress of the last 2 years. I told him about Gordon's phone call and what it had felt like to hear his own father described as someone who couldn't manage his own affairs. He went quiet for a long time after that. "I didn't think about how that would feel," he said. "I just needed people to believe a certain thing. I know." "That's worse, isn't it?" "Yeah," I said. "It is." But I didn't stay in that space. Because staying there doesn't help anyone. "Here's what I can tell you," I said. "I have a life that I built, and I'm not going to stop living it the way I want to live it. That's not negotiable. But you're my son. And that's also not negotiable." He didn't say anything. "Those 2 things can both be true," I said. "That's what I've figured out through all of this." It's been 4 months since that phone call. Connor and I have had dinner twice. Once in Mooresville, once in Charlotte. No Amber yet. That's its own situation with its own timeline. I'm not forcing it. The financial pressure on his end hasn't disappeared. Debt doesn't evaporate because someone has a phone call with their father. He's working through it. He hired a financial advisor, a real one, not one pointed at my accounts. That's his work to do. My work is different. 3 weeks ago, I drove up to a community college in Iredell County and met with their continuing education director about a scholarship fund for students entering licensed trade programs. Electricians, HVAC technicians, plumbers, the people who keep everything running. I'd been thinking about it for months, the way I think about things. Slowly, completely, until I'm sure. The director was a woman named Patricia, different Patricia, who had the particular energy of someone who has been fighting for program funding for too long and has learned to be grateful for everything. When I explained what I wanted to do, she got very still and then said, "Are you serious?" "I don't make appointments for things I'm not serious about," I said. "The paperwork is moving." Joanne would have liked this part. She always said I spent too much time protecting what I had and not enough time thinking about what it was for. She was right about most things. I still walk around the neighborhood in the mornings. I still argue with the geese about the lawn. I still drive the dented Silverado. I've started taking a woodworking class on Thursday evenings at the Y, which I am genuinely not good at, but the instructor is patient and the other students are worse than me, which is a comfort. One evening last week, I sat on the back porch after dark. The pond was flat and black and quiet. I thought about the last year, about Gordon's phone call and Philip's yellow notepad, and the moment I watched Connor walk out my front door without quite looking at me. I thought about what it costs to stand your ground with someone you love, and what it costs not to. There is a version of events where I say nothing, sign those papers, and spend the next several years watching my life become someone else's calculation. I was close to that version. Closer than I like to admit. Fear disguises itself as generosity sometimes. The desire to keep peace at any price feels noble until you understand what you're actually paying. I'm glad I paid attention. I'm glad Gordon called. I'm glad Philip picked up on a Sunday afternoon. Mostly I'm glad I remembered something Joanne told me once, early in our marriage, when I was letting a business partner take advantage of me because I didn't want the conflict. She said, "Walter, being easy to get along with is a good quality. Being easy to take advantage of is not the same thing." She said it without anger, just as a fact. The way she usually said the things that mattered. Protecting yourself isn't a betrayal of the people you love. Sometimes it's the only way to stay in their lives with any dignity left. And sometimes, when you hold that line clearly enough, it gives the other person the chance to actually see what they were doing. That's not guaranteed. Some people don't look. Some people leave and stay gone. But Connor looked. That's not nothing. I'll take it.